Gnostic Revision. Monograph Number 1. Gnostic Acoustics. The Emergency Theater was founded in Chicago circa 1990. That group of artists stated in their first manifesto their intention to make experiments on the magical imagination, taking a term from one of the illustrious personages in their lineage, Giordano Bruno. Through ceremonial invocations of a discontinuity of atavistic imagery and fumatic music, their purpose was the transmission and reception of certain occult formulae which would deepen and intensify introverted reality. This continues the investigation of what has become known as Gnostic acoustics. By way of introduction and perhaps to suggest what the foregoing sounds may enliven in your thoughts, let me offer a very general plan for ideas to rise in the form of historical documents. According to ancient cosmologies, the world was created from an acoustical substance, an initial sound which became light. Eventually part of this light became matter. Fissile materialization, however, was never completed because each material element still retained some of the sonorous substance out of which it was created. This implies some hidden influence which is affecting us today, moment to moment. The Pythagorean idea of a music of the spheres implies a similar influence. They theorized that as the planets of differing size, distance and activity push their way through etheric space, they force subtle modulations and vibrations to penetrate throughout our solar system. To the ancients, the sacred planetary number was 7. However, as this philosophy evolved, more were added, including invisible ones, until all puncitiform space was filled with metaphysical planets. The same fate was met by black holes in our own time by the diabolicals. Pythagoras reasoned that if sound exists as a natural element in the universe, the movement of the celestial bodies can be expressed as mathematical ratios in resonating bodies on Earth. The early partials of the overtone series arising from that resonating body eventually became our musical scales. Since music and consciousness depend upon the same principles of frequency, these ideas have increased to become a conceptual web for musicians and philosophers alike. The search still goes on well over 1,000 years later to correlate sounds with corresponding things, whether they be colors, gemstones, planets or chakras. However, in the meantime, people were listening to other forms of artistic invention. 30,000 Greeks were capable of following performances of the tragedies of Aeschylus with unflagging interest because of an alliance of all the arts uniting in a common object. Centuries later, melodic phrases, leading motives and the thematic transformations referring to persons, things, sentiments or events quickened the attention of several hundred listeners to Wagner's operas. The music of the spheres idea went underground, surfacing now and then in Gnostic chant or Renaissance architecture. The sacred sound found in nature became systematized, first by priestcraft, then by secularist tradition, both overwhelmed by the first few partials, shutting out the higher and less audible ones. There could as easily be a case made for corresponding the higher partials of the harmonic scale with those heretical sects that were abhorred and equally banished. The Gnostics, the Templars and alchemists, all thought of as being dissonant to civilized progress. The association of good and evil put upon certain intervals by renowned composers like Stravinsky, or the lecturing of Leonard Bernstein on the subject of the first half of the 20th century as being an unhealthy period for Mother Earth's tonal goodness, is only a continuation of an older fear of the dissonant. Remember the earlier stigma put upon the 11th partial as the devil's triad. Considering that the tritone, diminished fifth, augmented fourth, is the glue that hangs together equal tempered harmony, making modulation possible, could Western classical music be a vast satanic conspiracy? There are those who would argue that the tonic dominant resolution is indeed an evil symmetry. This fear is not innate, however, and is only built upon a few hundred years of musical habit directed by composers and specialists in their search for the elusive goddess of beauty. Perhaps an artist is like a fowler, he or she does not produce beauty but knows how to capture it. Here lies the aesthetic dichotomy. It is a matter of knowing whether Pythagorean ratios constitute beauty, or whether they are only a preparation for it, whether the rational organization or the spiritual charm inherent in the sensible is art. I tend to feel that a conscious embrace of Pythagorean spheres or world music results, as Morton Feldman noted, when music is universal, it never gets beyond its freshman level. Arnold Schoenberg had said basically the same thing. If it is art, it is not for all, and if it is for all, it is not art. Yet the temptation to tie into some cosmic scheme or claim angelic or demonic overshadowing at the sight of your improvisations looms ever strong. Gnostic Acoustics merely wishes to map the range and reach of the aesthetic arrest, Joseph Campbell's term, where one may enjoy as listener or player conceptualization, as well as experience where all contrived meaning has ceased. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference, or maybe the latter is impossible. Addendum. Following the holographic model of Pythagoras, who many cite as the father of our Western esoteric tradition, what we find in the harmonic series are serial modifications of a primal energy. Taking middle C as a fundamental tonic or root monad, Kether in Atzilut, we travel 4 octaves away through the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, 5 at the 11th overtone, the Diabolus in Musica, said to be the most dangerous interval. This is, according to Lurianic speculation, situated in Eth world of shells, Olam H. Klapot, the farthest reaches of cosmic catastrophe, Shevarat H. Kelem, or the breaking of the vessels. It was after this shattering or fall that all phenomena began, and the nations of the world were produced from its cortices. Practitioners of the Thelemic religion assign the number 11 to their new eon magic, the once beyond 10, because it is situated at the core of what most needs redeeming. Dane Rudge indicated that the 11th partial represented the keynote of the Atlantean race and its ultimate fall into black magic, adding that the element of occult fire is the basis of true magical operations. Liberation Through Sound, a course in 10 lessons, what Rudge's insight was trying to shape, following Blavatsky, is nothing less than the panorama of history through the symbolism of harmonic overtones. He portrays our species as evolving millions of years through a series of drifting root races with certain tones signaling evolutionary epochs. 2. He calls the relationship between the tritone and B-flat, 5th and 7th harmonics, the revelation, for its inner workings, and perhaps because it pulls out of existence the dominating power of the tonic from its home world. Considering the enigma that the 11th overtone has with the tonic, the 11:7 ratio tells us in Kabbalistic terms the vanishing nexus that could result if the holographic model is fully reified to collapse in a state of non-being. Ann 711. During a sitting with the Chicago trance medium Princess Andres in the early 60s, there was an interlude of unexpected synesthesia. When notes accidentally sounded on a piano in the room, she spontaneously responded with an intersense analogy, gustiferous in nature. Quietly moving to the keyboard hoping not to break her trance, I began an impromptu research in the analysis of intervals, all of which resulted in some fairly precise information which convinced me she was actually tasting each interval. Thirds and sixes transformed into various modifications of sweetness. The perfect fifth was neutral, almost tasseless, a minor seventh had a dissolving bitterness. Then too quickly perhaps I sounded an augmented fourth, 11th partial. First she looked totally bewildered, then recoiling in a choking manner grabbed her throat and exclaimed she was being poisoned. Research and experimental procedures could go on indefinitely and not bring any kind of spiritual conversion. What is all this heaping of esoterica in correspondence for? What is it a sign of? If it is to build lists of similes and catalogues, or give metaphor for poetry, then the most powerful magic is lost and Pythagoreanism is indeed dead in our time. The essential identity through the introspective experiment that the Pythagoreans of the 5th century BC and the Neoplatonists after them made, is a recurrent pattern intuition of a field-type reality. They completely identified mathematics, music and philosophy. This constituted their state of knowing, gnosis. If an idea is eternal, then all expressions of it are essentially the same. A piper and the cosmos might sound the same note. The Music of the Spheres, Jamie James, New York Grove Press, 1913. The identity of the Greek soul with this scheme was clear and solid. The modern Gnostic revisionist can still make the introspective experiment, but the same note can reveal other data. In a few hundred years, as James points out, the soul identity became increasingly unclear. In the age of Freud and William James, music and mathematics had no more inherent meaning than smelling a rose or cutting one's finger, and an influential composer like John Cage could teach, too, more and more completely liberate sounds from abstract ideas about them, and more exactly to let them be physically uniquely themselves. But I ask you, what is this a sign of? Isn't it a heaping on of another kind of exoterica? The first extreme is Wagner's wanting everyone to get the same message, German obedience. The second is total lack of a common denominator among diverse sounds of Cage's post-metaphysical world. The latter is perhaps more in line with the latest physics hypotheses, however unstable, of what themselves might be. But then there's the point of getting a better view of the attributes of diverse things, not only independent of a particular vantage point, but to determine their final nature, no matter how much Cage took apart things in order to let them be. They still cannot escape their antecedent contingents. This nitpicking does not detract from his genius or the idea of music of chance. On the contrary, Cage has set the stage for a yogic analysis of momentariness. An object's quality of disintegrating moment by moment is its subtle and permanent appearance and reality, when the Gnostic revisionist implements the unresolved tritone drone. The very scales of impurity in the depths of the universe may peel off to reveal the so-called cosmos as really a cosmetic job, a cover-up. In Gershom Scholem's 7th lecture on Major Trends of Jewish Mysticism, New York Shokin Books, 1961, he speaks of the deepest roots of the klipot existing already before the shattering of the vessels, these being mixed up with the sphatic lights, residue of Ein Sof in primordial space. One may ask, when was there ever cosmic order? What suddenly rouses to reality is a reeling, blood-drenched, gnashing chaos, out of control and ready to burn us up. Rudyard, in his lessons on sound, states that the harmonic 11 is the pulsating heart, quoting Blavatsky, the bundle of electromagnetic forces of Maya, meaning the illusion that phenomenon has true existence. The Gnostic will realize this assessment includes the whole harmonic scheme, where even the sweetness of a universal father tone eventually putrefies, and like the depleted billows of a cosmic organ exhausts itself as the impetus of his karma fades. This interval in the possession of a skilled alchemist can be the basis of the current Hermetic opus, in that it expresses an inscrutable tension, having qualities of non-duality with an androgynous fever. As the axiom of the alchemical dragon goes, the exact poison to cure poisoning. Remembering that C/F sharp is in the middle of our tempered scale, dividing the octave exactly in half, unreconciled opposites within the desire realm may be solved by a centrist philosophy that avoids resolution into the stifling requirements of an eternalism and the dispiriting nihilism of mechanistic reductionism. See the central philosophy of Tibet. Addendum to the Gnostics of the early centuries turned the tree of life, religion, on its head, actually back on its feet, their most excellent way to connect with a spiritual path that put the demands of the relative into the context of transcendence, was to adopt the ascending order of the Sphayat, starting from the bottom and rising, through the development of the individual in an evolutionary advancement. Gikatila and Abulafia, eminent Kabbalists of the 13th century, also adopted the ascending order, for still disputed reasons, as did alchemists who depicted the tree of life growing out of one's heart. The Gnostics could not be fulfilled by mere obedience to the laws of a static, therefore paradoxical, identity at the top of the tree of life. What was both eternal and emanational presented a dichotomy to them and not a refuge. This logic and reasoned insight set their religion apart from the accepted belief, and is heretical today as it was then in the Judean-Christian world. Through pathways of the mind, a more powerful support for them, and indispensable for purified growth, was through the laws of karmic evolution, where honoring the innuendos of spiritual action lead to their further effects toward freedom. This was not at all an unrealistic idealism with intangible benefits. Keeping one's beginningless karmic continuum in mind, notice that the harmonic process does not stop at the 11th partial but goes on to infinity. One might ask, where does this ever-swarming panchromatic music play itself out, if not in our billion-celled neurological orchestra? Stop for a moment and listen to that hiss inside your head. Here is the infinity of the upper partials and their spawn, the impending downpour for all sentient life. Can there be any more condensed musical prophecy than this? What better army of tantric allies can one have to vaporize the ego perspective, as we translate this space into number and deconstruct the whole of it? First octave, 1 interval, sound of the luminous nous, the great breath as unit of state and cosmic measure of the future universe. Second octave, 2 intervals, the chord of the orgoides, the demon, in throne room of the higher mind. The noumenal as creative, archetypal man. Third octave, 4 intervals, chord of the magical link, and votary world. The ensuing hermetic, musical, doctrine of signatures. Fourth octave, 8 intervals plus, the chord of Yeldaboth, exiled, by egoic perspectives. The incarnation of cetonic dissonance and mundane sensorial reaction with the ensuing state of amnesia.